if you leave your hand up, Maria. Yep.
So I wonder, what is your method of getting to the course?
My method is the same method that a child uses. In other words, not much of a method. I feel, in fact, the reason why we create methodologies is oftentimes to avoid the pain of the course. Right? If you think about how a child deals with an emotion, how does a child do it? So you're walking along the lolly aisle at the supermarket, and your little child's there, and your little child wants a lolly, and you don't get him a lolly, a candy, whatever you call them here. What do you call them here? Well, you'd have a Swedish name. Godis? Oh, right, so candy. It comes from candy, does it? Yep. So imagine your child's there, candy on the aisle, and you're walking along, no, you can't have that. The child goes into a meltdown. What does the child do? It doesn't care that there's 50 other people in the supermarket. It doesn't care that it's making a fool of itself. It doesn't care about any of those things. It just feels its emotion. Now, initial emotion it felt was anger, rage, wants to control. That's the initial emotion. And then after it goes through that emotion, if you still withhold the lolly from it, then it goes into this, sobbing place, and it just cries. And then after it goes through that crying, that really deep, gut-wrenching cry, and if you're still in there as a parent, right? See, most parents don't let it go that far, do they? What they do is they go, oh, fair enough, I get you candy, and hopefully everything will be over. But if you let it go to that extent and the child just grieves it out with real sobbing grief, 5 minutes later, what's the child doing? Laughing, carrying on, oh, everything's fine again. So what would you call that method? I don't know what you'd call that method. Well, it is releasing your feelings, but it's actually being true to every feeling, isn't it? That's all it is. It's like initial response the child is rage. So the child feels the rage, and then it still didn't get what it wanted, so it then went into its grief. And so it felt its grief and sobbed and carried on, and if there was no judgment and the child was let to complete that process, the causal emotion as to why it demanded the candy would be gone, and then it would never demand the candy again, actually. It would never go into rage again if it dealt with the emotion completely, right? And that's the way I use, but I don't know if you could call that a method. Like, to me, that seems to be the natural way. When I look at a child, the way I see it is that everything a child does is pretty much the best way of doing something, with the exception of when it's being unloving. So what I mean by that is, if the child is making unloving choices, then of course there's something wrong. There's some underlying cause. But if you look at what the child does with the expression of its emotion, it even experiences its own unloving emotion. So it experiences the rage, it experiences the fear, it experiences the grief, and then it's gone. And the child, straight after that, often will attract an event that will prove that it's gone, if you notice what the child does automatically. Like, I've seen parents not give a child a candy. The child's gone through a huge meltdown in the shop. The parent's been all worried about and all embarrassed, all red and flushed. And then they go out to the car park and the child's now sobbing, and then they put the child in the car and the child's now calmed down and it's finished the emotion, and then somebody else has given them a lolly. Have you seen that? Where that kind of things happen? The parent didn't do it, somebody else did. It's almost automatic what the child attracts as a result, and because it goes through the different process, right? This is all we need to do. It's the same thing. That's all we need. I'm not changing, right? And then I go, oh, maybe that's because I'm not wanting to change. And that's where most of us have our difficulty. We are not willing to admit when we do not want to change. We tell ourselves we want to, while at the same time not admitting. Yeah.
I feel now that, like, working through our addictions and our fears that's all the work we have to do. Because once we do that, we get to our causal emotion.
Yeah.
But what I see happening around us sometimes is that people hear some truth and they recognise, okay, I need to focus on causal emotion. And then that almost becomes addictive in itself, which people are trying to get there without working through the fact that I've lived this long and I'm not there already, so there's a reason.
Yes.
And it's to avoid feelings of helplessness and hopelessness about actual change, because the terror is so great of the causal emotion.
Yes. So if you look at, so what Mary's basically saying is, here we have the grief, which is the underlying causal emotion of every event that happens to us. And then above that is the fear. Now, some of the fear is also causal emotion because it was created when we were very, very young, and therefore it attracts a lot of events as a subsequent result. Those two groups of emotions are the key to our future life, in the sense that if we are going to be able to embrace those emotions, then in our future life we will always benefit from working our way through those emotions. But what we do instead is we create some addictions to avoid both groups of emotions, right? And when we create those addictions, we then live in these addictions, not even admitting to ourselves that they are addictions. In fact, many of us believe that our addictions are the most loving thing we could do. We've convinced ourselves of that fact, what we call a fact. And the reason why we do that is because we are unwilling to see one truth, and that is, if we're not already feeling these emotions, then it's because we don't want to. Makes sense, doesn't it? When do you not do what you don't want? When do you do what you want? Like, most of us finish up doing what we want a lot, don't we? As soon as you want to go down to have a drink, don't you go? As soon as you want to have something to eat, don't you get up and make yourself something to eat? So if you really wanted to feel your emotions of fear and grief, wouldn't you already be feeling them? Why do we think that that's any different than going and getting something to eat? If you want to give your partner a kiss, don't you just get up and go and give them a kiss? Do you delay it? Generally not. So if you do all of those things with the things you do want, and then you say, oh, it's too hard to feel these things, what does that tell you? It tells you you don't want them yet. So I'd be working on why I don't want them. That's what I'd be looking at. Like, why don't I want them? And sometimes why is quite complex. So for example, why don't I want my fear? Well, other people will laugh at me if I feel my fear in front of them. I'll feel like I'm weak if I feel my fear. I'll feel afraid. And there's a belief in many people that if they start feeling afraid, it will never end. Right? I feel like my emotions will never end, is another general fear. These are all belief systems that I have to address, right? Once I address them, I'll feel my fear. I'll have a pure desire, a burning desire in me to feel it. I will. Now, babe, probably your experience here would be good to relate, because it's taken you around about 4 years of sincere work, working through your addictions to get to the point where you're starting to feel these emotions and want to feel them, isn't it? Would you say that?
Yep, certainly. And I went through many times in the beginning of wanting a method and a technique or something that would just get me to the grief that I knew intellectually was there, because I felt so helpless and so resistive to feeling uncomfortable, feeling frightened, feeling that things were outside of my control, which was all my addictions.
So you wanted control?
Yep.
You wanted to feel safe? You wanted... Do you want to list some of the other things?
I wanted to feel liked by everyone.
Right, that was very big, and has been very big for Mary, wanting to be liked, and so therefore not getting into certain emotions. Because if she did,
yes, sorry.
Yep.
I associated that with safety.
Yep.
I wanted to not feel like I was crazy or
sane.
Sane.
You wanted to feel sane. Yeah.
Yep. I wanted to They're probably my 4 biggest addictions, I would say.
Yeah.
Can
So
you think of any
whenever one of
others?
those addictions were triggered, did you want to feel your fear?
No,
No. Or your grief?
no.
And what would you do instead?
Get angry.
Get angry every time.
Yeah,
Yep.
pretty much.
Yep.
And that's what I had to just really get real with myself about those addictions,
Yep.
about the fact that they existed, and did I really want? Did I want God more than I wanted control, safety, being liked, and feeling sane?
So you had to get those and say, are those as important to me as God?
Yeah,
And are those as important to me as becoming more loving?
yeah.
And then you had to start giving some of these up, didn't you?
And that was an emotional process. So I wasn't
Yep.
processing causal emotion, but I certainly went through pain through that process of giving up those addictions,
Yeah.
which is another part of this process that we're talking about, isn't it?
So you had to notice every time you wanted control. You had
Yep.
to see an event that caused a lack of control in
Yep.
your life. So
Yep.
Mary has had in the last 4 years many events which she has attracted. Beautiful
Yes.
soul, attracting these events.
Very powerful.
Yeah. And you've attracted many events where you've felt unsafe, out of control, like not
That
being
nobody
liked.
liked me. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had a whole media attack in Australia. Well, that helped her about the not being liked emotion, yes. So these are all events that we attract to address specific emotions. And once you started going through those emotions...
Well, and that's the I've jokingly said before that I felt like I was addicted to a drug, a substance, when I realised these emotions, I want to feel control, safe, liked, sane. And when just recognising that and saying, okay, I'm going to challenge that, then when I challenged it physically in my life, the feelings were so like pain, like I really recognised how addicted I was to those things.
Yep.
And then by going through that process of letting those things go, automatically my fear and grief just popped up. All this effort I'd done in the beginning, trying to get to grief, going to body workers, breathing, stay in my body,
Techniques,
I know what it
methods.
is, journal, all those
Yoga.
things. Yeah, all that stuff. Just, I hardly do any of that anymore because I just recognised that it was all about addictions. And once I'm through my terror, I know my causal emotion, my grief will just come out of me easily.
Yep.
And also, I'm a lot more at peace with this process.
Yep.
I used to berate myself about not getting to my causal emotion.
And struggle and feel self-attacking.
Yes. But when you recognise how much damage is in you and how conditioned we are to staying away from it, then if you emotionally decide to love yourself through that process, you can give yourself time,
exactly.
but not make excuses for the addiction.
You won't make excuses, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So in our house, excuses are just not on. You understand that? None of us we don't let each other get away with any excuse whatsoever. Yeah? And we're very focused on any addiction that we notice. Every addiction that's present, we're very focused on noticing. In addition, and addictions are like this: wanting control, wanting to be safe, wanting to be liked, wanting to feel like you're sane, wanting to feel like everybody else thinks you're sane. All of those kind of things are all those kind of addictions. And if we do not confront them, the law of attraction will expose them one after the other, after the other, after the other. Often 25 of them in a day. Like, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one in the course of a day. And we often go, every time, I don't want to face that, I don't want to face that one. We're like the child going, I want the lolly, and I want the candy. And we are constantly like that because we don't want to give up our addictions and we're not being honest. We need to be honest. Without being honest, the law of attraction won't benefit you at all. Right? Because the law will bring you events based on your condition. It'll expose the condition. Then when you're not honest about your condition, you're going to go, somebody else created that. Somebody else created that. Oh, that was because such and such did that. That was because he or she did that. And you'll never look at yourself. And whenever you do that, you just take away the power from yourself. You take away the power to change from yourself. Anyway, it's pretty